Welcome to the Holy Post. A new survey finds that moderately religious Americans are the most likely to say that they see dead people, which raises a question. Why are the non-religious and the very religious less likely to report encounters with the departed? Then New York Times columnist Ezra Klein says that by overemphasizing inclusivity, the Democratic Party has ironically become less inclusive. And Ryan Burge looks at the numbers behind the party's growing God problem. Will the Democrats ever figure out how to compete against MAGA? Then New Testament scholar N.T. Wright is back to discuss his latest book, The Vision of Ephesians. He tells me that the modern church has overemphasized the gospel importance of going to heaven and underemphasized the gospel importance of church unity. Also this week, Phil digs his hole with fans of Wicked even deeper. Hey, in case you haven't heard, we've launched a brand new email newsletter written by Holy Post Media's very own Drew Dick. We're calling it the Drew's Newsletter. Every week, Drew's going to aggregate the best news from around the web, along with the best content produced by Holy Post Media, and drop it right into your inbox with his smart analysis and wicked humor. And the best part is the Drew's Newsletter is free. So to join the email list, head over to holypost.com/newsletter. Again, it's holypost.com/newsletter. Here is episode 694.
Hey there, welcome back to Holy Post Podcast. I'm Phil Fisher. I'm here with Skye Chitani. Hi, Skye.
May I speak?
Yes, you may.
Hi, Phil.
Hi. They were talking too much, and they've been arguing all day like an old married theological couple. And Caitlin Chess. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, Phil.
Hi. We did a live event last week, and we haven't really talked about it.
True.
Since we did
I almost forgot
we were
about
all
it already.
there. Why do we have to talk about it?
There. Have you ever heard of debriefing?
Crabby? Yeah.
Oh,
Like
sorry.
when you, after the game, you say, okay, let's talk about what happened.
We actually did that without you.
When?
We all went and got a drink
we-
later.
That's true. We did debrief afterwards.
Okay, well then I'll give my impression. We had an event.
Okay.
It was in Lombard, Illinois. We had, 300 people or so. It's different doing one of these when there's a bunch of people who are staring at you and who bought tickets, and you feel like, are they getting their money's worth right now? Is what I'm saying.
Is that like consciously
That's
in
what's
your
in your
mind?
head.
the
I
whole
thought
time?
of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That never occurred to me.
That's because you're mostly thinking about your theological position that you're going to lob at Caitlin next.
You had the added stress of wrangling this
That's
thing.
true.
Yes,
Right. You were in charge.
I'm responsible for the energy.
Yes.
Yes.
This
That's a
is-
big responsibility.
It is.
you.
It is. I've been in that chair a handful of times.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a lot.
It is a lot.
And if you're looking out at a whole sea of people who are smiling and
Hopefully.
saying, okay, this better be good.
Mm-hmm.
This
Yeah.
better be good because
Yeah.
somebody flew in from Seattle. Holy cow, that's pressure. Anyway, I think it was pretty fun. I listened to it. You probably listened to it last week. That was the recording. I think I started out by falling on the stage. That was my first move.
I
Great.
think we
entertain
cut
them.
that though, didn't we? Cut
Yeah,
that?
yeah, I did.
Oh,
didn't
so that's some
mention-
behind the scenes.
That's behind the scenes. Yeah, I was, and it was. Do people know that your boyfriend was there?
I think people who
We
were
did-
there know that. Yeah.
We didn't say.
We
anything.
didn't, no.
we didn't mention
People
it.
I don't know if they could just sort of tell, but there
Yeah.
were multiple people who pointed him out to me.
As
Like,
if
he's over there. And I was like, I know.
Because he was sitting right at the edge of the aisle that
Yeah,
I was
that
walking
made
up to
me
get to the
nervous.
stage, and I saw him, and I was holding my ukulele, so I playfully tapped him on top of his head with my ukulele.
Yeah.
Just as I was about to take the step onto the stage, and then turned quickly back to misjudge the height of the stage and fall onto it.
Karma.
So that's what happens.
Which, really, that was karma for you, I
Yeah.
guess. So I shouldn't mess with your boyfriend? Is that
Yeah, I think
is
that's a
that what
pretty
the
good
universe
lesson to learn
was
from
telling
it.
me?
Yeah.
Okay, whatever. Time for the theme song.
What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye, Phil, Caitlin, and the Holy Post. Skye, Phil, Caitlin, and the Holy Post. And sometimes other people.
This episode of The Holy Post is sponsored by Hiya Health. Hey, do you have kids? Do you care about their health? Of course you do. Most kids' vitamins are basically candy in disguise, filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk kids really shouldn't be eating. That's why Hiya was created. The pediatrician-approved, super-powered, chewable vitamin for kids. 0 sugar, 0 gummy junk, yet they taste great and are perfect for picky eaters. Hiya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diets to provide the full body nourishment our kids need with a yummy taste they love. And we've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you need to go to hiyahealth.com/holypost. This deal is not available on their regular website. Go to hiyahealth.com/holypost and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults. And thanks to Hiya Health for sponsoring this episode.
I've got a true story. Amanda and I had a long weekend getaway planned for Cape Cod this summer with some friends. She told me weeks beforehand that I needed to get some new clothes for the trip, but I totally forgot. Then, just the day before we left, a new sponsor to this podcast called Poncho sent me 3 of their shirts to try. So I took them with me to Cape Cod, and I'm not kidding, they are my new favorite shirts. I don't know what kind of fabric they use, but it just feels great. These shirts are seriously comfortable, and they stay cool in the heat. They breathe, and they look fantastic. Here's the best part. They are truly all-day shirts. I wore one of my Poncho shirts all day while hiking around Martha's Vineyard in shorts, and then in the evening, I just threw on some pants and wore the same shirt out to a very fancy dinner. Poncho shirts can dress up or dress down depending on whatever you're doing. And everyone is backed by the Poncho Promise. Free shipping and free returns, free exchanges to make sure you get just the right fit. They have a whole bunch of different styles, the original, the Western, denim, and ultralight. You can get them in short or long sleeves, regular or slim fit, and in a ton of colors and patterns. So if you've been looking for the perfect shirt, something breathable that fits great, feels even better, and stands out in a good way, give Poncho a try. Go to ponchooutdoors.com/holypost for a $10 off coupon on your first order. That's Poncho Outdoors, PONCHO outdoors.com/holypost for $10 off and free shipping. And thanks to Poncho for my vacation shirts and for sponsoring this episode.
It is hard to perform the theme song live because I have performed it so seldom.
It's fun though when you do. I like it.
Oh, it's fun because it's like someone who's about to fall off a high wire.
The other piece, though, is
this person is clearly losing his balance.
back in the
This'll
green
be
room.
fun.
You were practicing in the green room.
Oh, yeah,
and
it was fine then.
you were tuning your ukulele, and but when you fell,
yeah, it detuned my ukulele.
Yeah.
It was a comedy of errors. But as long as people felt like they got their money's worth.
I think
from
they did.
The comedy of errors and a few profound statements not made by me.
I did have a lot of people say to me afterwards, like, oh, it was so funny how Phil pretended to fall at the beginning. So, like, it seemed like a bit.
It did look like a vaudeville
It did.
bit.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
But now we know it wasn't. So.
Were you injured,
Why
by the
would
way?
I even do that?
Yeah, are you okay?
I have a pretty big scab on my shin.
Oh, were you bleeding?
A little bit.
Under your
During
pants?
the show.
A little bit. Yeah. I bleed for you guys. I bleed for you.
Aw.
We leave it all on the stage. Okay. What should we talk about? But did you enjoy it?
It was so fun.
Would you want to
yeah.
do more of those?
Yeah.
Okay.
I like being in a big group of people. Like, I like when we have a lot of people there. It's fun.
Yeah. As long as they're not allowed to talk.
Yeah.
And they focus on us.
Right. I'm really just about people listening to me. That's all I really want. No, I like that. And we got questions. It's
Yeah,
just
we did.
fun. It's
Yeah, we
fun.
did.
We do this so often with like very few people.
Yeah, just
and
in a box.
you don't get a sense that people are listening, but when you hear them laughing or like, or like, it's just nice to like recognize that there are
gasping.
people
Or
there. Yeah,
gasping.
or booing.
Yeah, I got some.
Someone booed at something.
No, I got a fair number of negative noises for my position on Wicked.
That's
Yes.
true because it was wrong.
That didn't
Yeah.
go over well.
That was not
I
good.
still have not seen the movie.
Yeah, that's okay.
You should, because the second half is going to come out. You should see it.
Whatever the morality is of the original movie, take it and turn it upside down.
I saw the Broadway show many, many years ago, and I don't remember.
Did you like it?
No, I have no memory of it.
I saw the Broadway show.
Wow.
I saw the Broadway show with my wife. Neither of us liked it. We both walked out saying, I didn't really like that.
I also saw it with my wife. We had the seats like really far to the side, and you couldn't see the depth of the stage as much. I think I probably got cheap seats because I had no money.
Okay.
This is the most grumpy old man conversation.
No, I'm just saying, it's not like I'm a big Wizard of Oz fan to begin with. It's I don't care.
That's fair.
But, yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't like turning heroes into anti-heroes and villains into misunderstood.
I agree.
Which is the common, like every villain in Hollywood, except for in horror movies, which we talked about, which was interesting.
Go back and listen to that.
Is just like the remake of The Grinch Who Stole Christmas.
Yeah.
And you find out his backstory. He was bullied as a little tiny green Grinch because he was green and furry, and so
which tracks.
All the normal kids bullied him. But that's like become the backstory of every villain.
Right.
It's not their fault. It's our fault as a society. We judged. Judging is the problem.
This, by the way, is why one of my favorite movies is The Dark Knight, the Christopher Nolan Batman movie with the Joker, with Heath Ledger.
To see the world burn.
And he gives a different backstory every time people ask him, or he talks about the scars. And I heard Christopher Nolan interviewed about this, and he said, "Listen, the Joker was supposed to be this character that represents total chaos, and if I gave him a backstory, you would sympathize with him in some way. You'd understand why. And if you understand chaos, then it's not really chaos."
Yeah.
So I thought it was such a brilliant way of depicting a villain without sympathy.
Chaos.
There is a Christian history of thinking of evil as just nonsensical.
Yes.
Like there is no logic to it because logic is good and created from God. And so evil is nonsensical.
That's why I love The Dark Knight. And I've used that many times to illustrate evil in the Bible.
So there's a history of telling stories that portrayed personifications of evil. Like this is the evil way. This is the evil path personified in this person. And we don't like that anymore because we think we're saying that some people are that, when it was a parable. All of those were parables. And so now the evil is the cultural evil that made people do bad things.
But I do like the stories that explain the origin of an evil person.
Yeah.
When it's a story of their intent was good and it leads to evil, because that's a morality
real.
story too. Right,
that
exactly.
happens. That's in the Bible.
But it's not just blaming society.
Yeah, and that's less of a parable
because the ones
about evil, and more of a commentary on how we treat each other. Right, and everything seems to have become a commentary on how we treat each other.
Which is terrible.
Not horror movies.
Well, yeah. Well, but in your example, Phil, part of the problem that I have when it's too clean is, actually, the person you thought was good is bad, and the person you thought was bad was good, rather than complicating it and going, someone did a bad thing. Yeah. They may have had good intentions. It still was bad. It doesn't flip your whole judgment of it. It might make you understand them more, but it doesn't just flip what is expected to be good and bad.
Okay.
Glad we talked about it again.
That's cool. Yeah. Hey, can I tell you more about Hellboy?
Oh, my goodness.
No. Okay, I won't. But speaking of... In the theme of Halloween, did either of you trick or treat? I saw you in a costume. Did you go out?
I gave candy to kids.
You gave candy?
And went to a party.
Okay.
But none of those kids are old enough to know who you were.
Okay, you know what is funny? There were multiple times at the party at the house, I was Princess Mia from Princess Diaries, and my boyfriend was Joe, her security guard, just because
that is so
none of her...
set in time.
It's so specific. But what it meant was that like all of the parents of young kids were immediately, because I did the like headphones and the sunglasses and the tiara, all of the parents were like, oh my gosh, Princess Mia. All the little kids were like, we don't know. But then every single time a parent would be like, she's a princess, the girls would be like, oh, great. Like,
princess,
once you say princess. And I was wearing a tiara.
And she's listening to her theme music. Right
exactly.
Now. That's what it was.
Yeah. Neither of you dressed up, though, did you?
I was going to go as Hellboy, but that I was worried that people wouldn't understand the moral ambiguity.
How would you have dressed up? I don't know what he looks like.
Oh, look him up.
Oh, boy. I was kidding.
It's quite a...
That's not... I don't have the build.
That and the prosthetics.
Whoa. Whoa.
See where the horns were?
That's really, they're cut off?
Yes.
I thought they were like goggles. That were
No,
gonna come
no,
down.
they're not goggles. He shaves them every day to keep them from growing
Why?
as a way of rejecting his demonic origin. See? Yeah, and the climax of one of the movies, I forget it's the first one or the second one, the guy who raised him, who's a devout Catholic, as he's being tempted to turn back to his demonic origin, throws him a rosary, and it burns a cross into his palm. And he just looks at it and turns away from the dark side.
Whoa.
So it's, it's very interesting.
So you handed out rosaries at Halloween.
I handed out chocolate rosaries.
I love that.
They melted in kids' palms. I thought, it's just like, no, I didn't. I don't dress up.
I love dressing up, but I didn't do it this year.
I don't like it when people stare at me. And when you dress up, I think that's the goal.
A little bit,
To draw attention.
Yeah. 4 in 10 evangelicals say they've been visited by the dead. This is in Christianity Today.
Those are some pretty terrible churches.
A periodical I enjoy quite a bit. In a recent Pew Research Center survey, 42% of self-identified evangelicals said they had been visited by a loved one who had passed away. Rates were even higher among Catholics and Black Protestants, 2/3 of whom reported such experiences.
Interesting.
Interactions with the dead fall into a precarious supernatural space. This is Kate Shellnut writing for Christianity Today. Staunch secularists will say they're impossible and must be made up. Bible-believing Christians may be wary of the spiritual implications of calling on ghosts from beyond. Yet more than half of Americans believe a dead family member has come to them in a dream or some other form. I don't know what to do with things like that. Because you can end up sounding like a secularist, just saying, well, that's not possible. You're just making stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the way that my childhood taught me to respond is you were probably hearing from a demon and you should definitely not listen to that voice.
Wow.
So if you woke up as a kid and said, "Hey, great grandpa spoke to me in a dream," your parents would have been like, "That was a demon. That was not your
You're being demon oppressed."
Okay.
And we're calling the pastor. Yeah.
Wow.
I part of my high school years were during the Satanic Panic.
Right.
So
that's intense.
we had a heightened sensitivity. In fact, my junior high years were kind of the birth of the Satanic Panic, where we had traveling evangelists come to my church and rip up Ouija boards in the pulpit to show that we were fighting back.
It folds in half.
It folds in half.
Like
So
a
you just
board.
Fold.
I thought they were pretty thick.
No,
they're cardboard. They're
Yeah,
cardboard. It's just a board game.
It's a board game.
Proof that
from
I've
Parker
never
Brothers.
used one.
It's a board game from Parker Brothers.
Yeah, okay.
That was sold in Toys R Us.
That's wild.
I know. And boy, were we concerned about that. So if you had one in your home, you were supposed to bring it in so they could rip it up.
Okay.
Because if you're hearing from the beyond, you're hearing from demonic powers. So, okay, which way of those ways is the right way to think about this?
Can it be a little bit more complicated?
Shocker.
I know.
Oh, you
This
just
is my-
want to make everything complicated. And our audience says, simplify.
No. Here's the thing.
Okay.
I have spoken to quite a few people who have had these kinds of experiences. And often it's people who've experienced significant trauma or grief over the loss of someone. And so one explanation is in a dream, in our grief, in our pain, we dream about the person that we've lost.
Mm-hmm.
So that it could
That doesn't seem implausible.
it could be a grief response.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that in this study, the people with some religious affiliation report these more often than people without them.
People who are moderately religious seem to be more likely than other Americans to have these experiences. This is due in part to the fact that some of the most traditionally religious groups, as well as some of the least religious parts of the population, are less likely to report having interactions. So do we know it means they haven't had these experiences or they just don't tell anyone about it?
Caitlin and I were talking about this earlier. I think it's interesting that it's people who are quote unquote moderately religious who report it the most because they're open to this possibility. But the people who are more significantly religious, maybe those with more biblical knowledge, who are like, oh, no. This is a bad idea, right? So there seems to be some connection between your openness to this happening and it happening. which may, again, relate to our psychological makeup to be open to it. But here's the other thing. Two things can be true at the same time. It is true that Scripture calls God's people to not pursue communication with the dead, also known as necromancy.
Oh, yes. That's a scary word.
That's a very scary
word. I don't like that word.
It can both be true that we're not called to engage in that. That doesn't mean it's not possible or that God never uses it for his purposes.
Oh, thin ice.
I
feel like I'm on thin ice
This is the story of Samuel, the witch of Endor, not the Ewok witch of Endor, but just the witch of Endor. And
Return
Saul,
of the Jedi, Star Wars. Three.
There's a witch of Endor in Star Wars?
There's the planet.
There's a planet called
Moon.
Endor.
There's the moon of Endor.
The moon of Endor.
Full of teddy bears called
where
Ewoks.
the happy teddy bear warriors live.
Teddy bears?
Yes.
Oh,
you'll
how
love
do you
it.
spell that?
You haven't gotten there yet?
EWOK.
How many Star Wars have you watched?
I've seen the one where she kisses the guy who turns out to be her brother.
Oh,
that's the only one.
That's the only one. That's
it's Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
That's number 2.
Yeah.
You didn't watch number 1.
I don't know what to tell you about that.
Okay.
Anyway, the story is
the Ewoks could appear in people's dreams from the beyond.
The story is that Saul, the king, goes to the witch of Endor, and he wants some assurances about this, that, and the other. And the spirit of Samuel, who's dead, appears and says, "Saul, you moron, what are you doing? God's going to judge you for this." Now, some people will go,
What's the Hebrew for moron?
It's Moroni.
Moroni? The angel?
Right. No. Anyway, some people will look at that story and go, well, that couldn't have happened because communication with the dead's not possible.
Yeah.
It was a demon or blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But there's no indication in the text itself that this was not Samuel and not his spirit. It's presented as if it is truly Samuel. And there's a case where God uses the spirit of someone who's dead to bring judgment upon Saul. Saul is condemned for pursuing communication with the dead, and yet a true message of God's wrath comes from a spirit from the dead. So all that to say, it's complicated. We are not called to participate in this or pursue it, but it doesn't mean it never happens and doesn't mean that God can't use it.
Interesting.
So there's your complicated answer.
And if you have that kind of experience and it gives you peace,
okay.
Does that
great?
You still should not pursue that kind of experience.
Yeah.
In search of peace.
Right.
Okay. But creative. Well, like creative prayer, where you were,
creative prayer, is that a class you took in college?
That's
Phil?
what I was just wondering.
Like theophostic healing is a form of prayer healing, where you go back into a traumatic experience and you invite Jesus to show you where he was in that experience. And a lot of people have found immense healing from that. But if it's your grandpa.
No, your grandpa,
who died.
That you're praying to show up.
Yeah. Jesus is different. We talked
about this a little bit at our live show, but the practice of witchcraft, necromancy, these kinds of things are all ancient forms of trying to control deities, which is what Saul was trying to do. He wanted to control the outcome of a battle, and so he wanted to consult with the dead to do that. And that's what's forbidden, because we're called to trust God, not try to control him. So if your engagement or pursuit of communication with the dead is a seeking of control, of assurance, of whatever, we're called to trust God, including with those who've died.
My efforts to interact with Ronald Reagan so that he can give us at least his opinion of what's going on currently in the Republican Party.
Not good.
Not
good. Wouldn't recommend. Okay. Wouldn't recommend.
I don't think it's Ronald.
I got Nancy. Nancy was pretty easy to get.
She has a hotline.
Okay. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, I just think part of what was interesting to me, other than what Skye said about it moderately religious being the most significant category, there's another part of this where the people who are running some of these studies were saying, like, it's sort of a precondition for having the experience that you believe the experience is possible. And I just think that that's an important truth about a lot of human experiences, especially spiritual experiences, that we should just keep in mind that for most people, you will find a way to interpret what happens to you according to the ideas you already have about the world and human life. And that sometimes you can be really spurred out of that by an experience that is very counter to what you expect or think is normal. But for the most part, we should just be aware of the fact that, especially as we continue to have conversations around the nuns, like NONES, and kind of spirituality in America, part of the question of what kinds of religious experiences people can have is whether they have a plausibility structure that allows for that.
Oh.
And I think so. I think this relates to all the conversations we've been having about, okay, is the interest in general spiritual things good or bad? Is it like going to lead people to Christianity, or is it going to lead them to weird witchy stuff? And I don't think this answers it, but I do think
Wicked?
This is a
Like Wicked.
Like Wicked, yeah, sure.
And Harry Potter.
all that weird witchy stuff. But I do think this gives us an idea that like it does matter that people have a plausibility structure for the supernatural, or a plausibility structure for a life outside of material life. Can they then take it in ways that we as Christians might say, you're trying to control something you shouldn't control, you're trying to seek after some experience that isn't actually going to satisfy you because what you're looking for is, communion with God. All of that's true. But I do think it matters that people just live in a kind of universe of what they believe is possible that includes things like this.
Okay. So if Reagan does show up in my dream,
you should do what he says.
That he wants me to transcribe.
Yeah, I would. I know. Thank you.
Write down and post on Twitter under his pen name, under his name. I should, yes or no? You should find someone to talk to about that. Okay. Besides Reagan.
Hopefully, yeah.
Ezra Klein wrote a big piece in the New York Times, also his podcast this week. There is a way you beat Trump and Trumpism, and it's not necessarily the way the Democrats have been going about it. It's basically what he's getting at. It's interesting. It's a long piece. I would recommend reading it. He laments that the number of places in which the Democratic Party is competitive in the U.S. has shrunk significantly. First of all, before we get into this, my goal, Phil's goal, is not for the Democratic Party to win elections. My goal is for Trumpism to lose.
Yeah.
My goal is for this fever to break because of the damage it has done and is doing to the church and the world. So this is not me saying, hey, I want to help Ezra Klein, because he talks about how do we get a long-term majority for the Democratic Party. And that's not necessarily any better than a long-term majority for the Republican Party, because it'll both lead to excesses, but that's not the point.
I think we would all agree that we need two healthy political parties in the United States. And right now it feels like we have none.
Yes.
None.
Yes. So he says, in American politics, power is not decided by a popular vote. The Electoral College, the House of Representatives, and particularly in the Senate, it's apportioned by place, not people. Democrats don't just need to win more people, they also need to win more places. That will require a more pluralistic approach to politics. It will require the Democratic Party to see internal differences as a strength that requires cultivation rather than a flaw that demands purification. He's basically calling for a bigger tent with more debate inside the tent as opposed to pushing dissenters outside the tent, and then they end up running over to the Republican Party. The endless fantasy in politics is persuasion without representation. You elect us to represent you, and where we disagree, we will explain to you why you're wrong. The result of that politics tends to be neither persuasion nor representation. People know when you're not listening to them, and they know how to respond. They stop listening to you. In too many places, Democrats sought persuasion without representation, so they got neither. One strategist who's done a lot of focus groups said when he asked people to describe the two parties, they often describe Republicans as crazy and Democrats as preachy. One woman said to him, I'll take crazy over preachy. At least crazy doesn't look down on me. And then there was something, he talks about a couple other things. It's a long piece. Talks about a couple of things that are really interesting. The effect of social media, and that we tend to listen to the voices of the politically active class and not actual people. And then he says this is really interesting. It says from 2012 to 2024, Democrats moved sharply left on virtually every issue. They often did so, arguing that they were finally representing communities that had long suffered from too little representation. Okay, that's a good thing, right? But it went wrong. Democrats became more uncompromising on immigration and lost support among Hispanic voters. They moved left on guns and student loans and climate and lost ground with young voters. They moved left on race and lost ground with Black voters. They moved left on education and lost ground with Asian American voters. They moved left on economics and lost ground with working class voters. The only major group in which Democrats saw improvement across that whole 12-year period was college-educated white voters.
That was the mic drop paragraph for me.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if other Democrats who read the New York Times can't recognize the truth of those statements, then they're hopelessly lost.
Yeah, and here's a great example. About, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, we were taught that we should say Latinx instead of Latino. Mm-hmm. And that was respecting, we're fighting, dismantling the patriarchy.
Right.
Latino is gendered, and so that's sexist, so we're all going to say Latinx.
The whole Spanish language is gendered.
Yeah. And what we learned from that in the 2024 election is that if you were a candidate who used Latinx instead of Latino, you got less of the Latino vote than if you were a candidate that used Latino. Yeah. So again, this is where you have the activist class saying, this is the new word, this is the new term, this is the new orthodoxy. And then you have normal average Latinos saying, that's not even a word. But we have a word. This has always been our word. Right. Why are you making up words?
Substituting like actual material change for getting the words right.
Right, but the irony is, in the name of trying to be gender inclusive, you're being culturally insensitive.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you're not honoring a people's culture or language.
Yep.
You're forcing it to fit your convention, your culture and language.
Yeah.
So it's colonial in being anti-colonial.
Yeah.
It's insane.
So describe that's a pretty good description of the problem. Now, how would you summarize his solution?
Other than what you've said in terms of the Democratic Party being a bigger tent, and I appreciate part of the reason I wanted us to talk about this article was because of later on when he's talking about if it's possible to run pro-life Democrat candidates, which Skye has talked a lot about. So I thought that was interesting that he was like, can I say that and not have you think I am pro-life myself and against reproductive rights, which in his context is really important. So I appreciated that. But the other thing I thought was such a helpful approach, and I like Ezra Klein and I listen to him a lot and think even though he's coming from a different political place and a very different kind of religious kind of metaphysical place than I am, I love that he is so committed to actual politics, like to doing politics. He has a line from Bernard Crick after the one right before the part that you read about persuasion without representation. He quotes him saying, politics involves genuine relationships with people who are genuinely other people, not tasks set for our redemption or objects for our philanthropy. And I just think that is such a helpful word to one end of the political spectrum, because I truly think right now both ends think they are completely right and there's really no room for disagreement. One side is saying, because we're completely right, we should just dominate you. Like, you don't deserve to be a part of our political community because you are just so wrong. The left, I think, less violent than at least in terms of who is in power right now, less concerning in terms of actual material change that can be made. But the downside on the left is believing that if people just knew the facts you knew and listened to you explain your position, they would just believe you. Like, they would just agree with you because you're just so obviously right. They haven't listened. Right. They've been watching a lot of Fox News. They haven't been watching your favorite commentator. If you just explained it to them, they would get it. And I've always loved, a lot of people have written about Obama this way, as because he was formed politically at a pretty young age in a community organizing context, where one of the fundamental ways that people go about that is saying, first, everyone has an interest that they bring to this conversation, and your interests are different, and sometimes they will conflict directly. And because he was like politically brought up in that, he had, and actually a lot of people have written about him in contrast to Biden, who had the more kind of old school liberal way of saying like, well, we're just right. If I convince you of it, you'll see it and it'll be fine. And Obama was like, no, some people disagree with us. They just believe differently than us. They have different values than us. And I think treating people like real human beings both means not wanting to dominate them, not saying because I'm right and you're wrong, I get to dominate you. But it also means not assuming you're just right and if you could persuade them, you would convince them. Instead, it involves figuring out compromises and common ground and a middle way when you are going to just have to live with people who have very different ideas about family and sexuality and what makes a good community. And I think we have tried to avoid through domination or just avoidance the fact that we just believe very different things. And a better way forward for the Democratic Party, which is a better way forward for our politics in general, is saying, as this line says, genuine relationships with people who are genuinely other people, not tasks or objects.
Another way of putting that is, it seems like what he's saying here and what I've recognized for a while is the Democratic Party is just in total denial of reality.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Was it Peter Drucker who said the first role of a leader is to define reality? And the Democratic Party, ever since 2016, has been in denial about reality. I think they were in denial about the baggage that Hillary Clinton carried as a candidate. I think they were in total denial about Biden's age and his deterioration as a candidate, which is why they screwed up in 2024. I think they're still in denial about Donald Trump's popularity. They can't believe that a significant number of Americans support him. And I think they're in denial about most Americans still hold to the fact that there are two genders and there are basic realities in the world that they just are chafing against. And to your point, Caitlin, their attitude is, well, if everyone just had our elite Ivy League education, they would understand the truth and see things our way. And they're trying to make America into the place where they can win elections again, rather than asking, who are Americans and how do we serve and meet them where they are?
Right.
Yes.
Right. So our friend Ryan Burge, who's a great data scientist, published a piece looking at this. The title is Democrats Have a God Problem. He says between 2008 and 2024, white Democratic voters became significantly less Christian just over those 16 years. At the same time, black Democratic voters became slightly more Christian. So they're actually moving in opposite directions. Today, and this is ironic, so black Democratic voters, like middle American, African-American families, middle African-American, American families, middle American, black families are, and then we've talked about this before, are socially conservative, but often politically liberal, you know, in other ways. Black Democratic voters have become incomprehensible, this is me talking, to both parties. They are too religious for Democratic leadership to understand and too progressive for Republican leadership to understand. Overall, the number of non-white Democrats who say religion is very important has fallen since 2008. But black Democratic voters are slightly more religious than they were in 2008, and white Democratic voters are significantly less religious. So here's a thesis. I'm going to throw out this thesis, and you guys can jump all over it, okay?
Great.
And tell me how much you love it. This is my thesis. Over the last 40 years, the American right has become overly associated with one specific religion. Okay. Over the last 20 years, the American left has become a religion with doctrines of sin, redemption, heresy, etc. So rather than being an expression of Christianity, which American progressivism was 100 years ago, it has become an alternative to Christianity, a religion for the irreligious. And this is why African-American voters are so confusing to both parties, because they don't fit. They're not looking for a new religion. They have one, but for the most part, a Democratic Party led by progressive, special interest groups and activists has a new religion, and with a new theology of original sin, with new theology of redemption.
And you don't think that's true on the right?
That's what I was going to say.
I think on the right, it's a syncretic religion,
sure.
But it's based in Christianity.
It still uses Christian symbols and language and ideas.
Because, and Ezra says this, is like if you talk about faith and values to Democrats, you cannot, actually Ryan Burge said that. Ryan Burge says that the Democratic Party is so split between white secularists and non-white, mostly religious people, largely Christian people, that there is no unifying message around faith.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, if you look at the stats about Black Americans who vote Democrat and their views on a lot of things, they're closer to the median American view on everything than white Democratic voters are.
Right.
So if they would just listen to their own Black voters, they would probably win more elections.
So why don't they?
It's a great question.
I think it's too easy for people to say, on the left, to say middle American Black people are religious because it's their tradition. It's their culture. And on the right, they will say, and I hear this criticism a lot, that Black families vote Democrat because their theology is corrupt. Black Christians that vote Democrat.
Despite all the evidence that says Black Americans have the most orthodox theology of all Christians in the country.
We've become so, on the left, we've so associated being right with being secular. And on the right, we've so associated being right or just or moral with being Christian that we can't figure out what to do with African Americans.
Well, go ahead, Caitlin.
Well, I was going to also say part of the Ezra Klein answer to this, I think, is the kind of professional, progressive, online chattering class is just disconnected from Black voters, but from lots of voters that are just not in that world. And I've seen this in theological academia as well when it comes to people of color in general. It's like they really want that representation, but you have to kind of be willing to work in the norms and the mores of the professional academic class. I'm sure he would say it's the same is true of the kind of professional progressive political class is like you were saying about Latinx. Like you just kind of have to conform to these norms to be accepted. I mean,
orthodoxy.
There's an orthodoxy, absolutely. But I think he would say that's why they don't see it, is it's like to get in, you have to already have that. So if you're looking around and saying like, who's the average Democratic voter to my mind, you're not actually seeing it, but you think you are, especially because, and I thought this point was really helpful, earlier in the article, he talks about the nationalizing of all of the politics. You're not getting a regional perspective. So not only are you actually getting a very narrow perspective of the particular online subset of people, but you think it's more universal than it is because it feels like, well, these are people from all over the country and they're working in different parts of politics. But you don't understand that there's a self-selection where people who might be in your big tent but disagree with you on some things and it actually might cause them to depart from you are not being heard.
I think part of it, though, is to their credit, the Republican Party has been very successful at communicating a simple, compelling narrative. And it's a unifying narrative for their coalition. It's a narrative of authoritarianism. It's a narrative of Christian nationalism. It's a narrative of domination of their political enemies.
But that's a subset.
Well, I don't know if it is.
It's growing.
I had a conversation earlier today with a friend of mine who's a Latino pastor, and he was talking about why is Donald Trump so appealing to so many Latino Americans?
You almost did it.
Latinx Americans? No, Latino Americans. And he talked about, so many of them are Pentecostal. So many of them have values of like that dominant leader. So many of them have a sort of prosperity gospel approach to things. And all these are values that are inculcated in the Republican coalition these days. And it's easy to communicate to them a political vision of America of defeat your enemy, dominate them. We have this charismatic leader. It's all very simple. The Democratic Party, what is their unifying narrative that brings together their coalition? I don't think they have one. And they haven't had one, at least since Barack Obama.
Yeah, I think it used to be up through Obama's election was be on the right side of history. That there's a moral arc to history. Right. It's bending towards justice.
From MLK, he had it literally embroidered in the carpeting of the Oval Office.
MLK did?
No.
He did the embroidering?
Obama had that quote embroidered in the carpet of the Oval Office.
Right. Yeah. But then there was the notion amongst the educated class that we know what is just.
Yeah.
And so so if you're opposing this, you're opposing the arc of history, and you just got to get in line or get out of the tent.
That's the irony, going back to the quote you had from Ezra Klein. The only major group in which Democrats saw improvement over the last 12 years was college-educated white voters. Mm-hmm. So that's the elite class. That's the donor class within the Democratic Party. They're the ones who are populating and creating the messaging of the party. And it's just not resonating with most Americans anymore because most Americans don't believe in Ivy League ideals.
Right.
And they're totally out of touch.
We increasingly see, the more we learn about the current state of the Ivy League, the more we question its legitimacy philosophically.
Let me just wrap up with this.
Yes.
I agree with Ezra Klein's prescription in the sense that, they need a bigger tent. They need a diversity of voices within the Democratic Party so they can be regional and accommodate to different things in different places. I think that's part of the solution. The other side of it, though, is they do need a unifying narrative of America, of what is it that binds us together as a people, despite our diversity and differences. And I'm sorry, you're not going to get that unifying narrative coming out of Harvard or Yale or Brown or one of these Ivy League schools that is trying to divide us more and more through identity politics. Okay,
Caitlin, take us home. What's the solution?
I will say,
how can we help?
Well, I'm so glad you asked, Bill. One of the other sort of solutions he gives that I loved, in part because I fought with Skye for 2 hours in a recording last week about this. He makes the point that in studying the history of liberalism, he discovered something that, again, if you do study the history of liberalism, you will find very quickly, which is that earlier forms of liberalism did not just believe that there was this like pure procedural set of rules that just kept everyone safe. It believed that there was a bare set of rules that accounted for basic rights that every human should have. But then within that, you needed certain virtues for that kind of society to flourish. And part of what he's describing is you can't just say the rule is you respect other people's religions, or like the rule for us constitutionally is there is no religious test for office and you have religious freedom. No, you need to pair that with a community that values respecting the dignity and humanity of other people and recognizing their differences and not just respecting that in a kind of bare way, but also recognizing that you as a community are made better by acknowledging those differences and celebrating them and learning from them. And it's not just the bare procedural rules. It's actually the virtues and how you treat other people. And that's where sometimes I think it sounds really pious or silly or just not significant enough for us to say how you learn to talk about and to people who disagree with you politically in real life, in your church, in your family, online matters. But if he's right, and I think he is, that we could preserve the Constitution and preserve the Republic and also continually have these problems without inculcating that kind of virtue among ourselves in our communities. If he's right about that, then it actually is very significant for you as an individual, for you as a family, for you as a church to go, we are going to work really hard at not just speaking well to and about each other, but having that be a practice. Like that's what virtue is not just I have a hypothetical commitment to these things. Virtue is I have practiced over time. I have strengthened this muscle over time so that when it's difficult and when it's easy, when the rubber meets the road in a really big important moment, I have strengthened my impulse towards treating someone else with respect and dignity and like a human being, even when it feels like the stakes are too high to do that. I have learned over time that that's a virtue that I have gained that I can exercise when it really matters.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do it. Last word, Skye. You got a last word?
Do I have a last word?
Yeah. You looked like you wanted to fight me a little bit.
No, I totally concur. I find it interesting that Ezra Klein has become a target on the left.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like a lot of people, especially in the aftermath of the Charlie Kirk assassination and some of the remarks he had about Charlie Kirk. A lot of people on the far left think Ezra Klein is giving up. Like he's throwing in the towel. Right. And I don't see that at all. I see him rediscovering both the virtues of a liberal democracy and the importance of maintaining a liberal democracy on personal virtue and community virtue, which comes from families and churches and religious groups and things like that. And I applaud the direction he's going. It bothers me that he's now the target for the far left and the far right. But he's probably closer to where more of us as Americans need to be.
It feels like eventually he and David French are going to get married.
Oh my gosh.
They'll both be equally despised by all sides. They'll be stuck in the middle and there'll be nothing left to do but just wrap their arms around each other and say, there but for the grace of God.
They are colleagues.
So weird,
and I
weird
assume,
fanfic.
I assume friendly colleagues at the New York Times. But we already said last word, but he mentions this in the article too. Our media and our algorithms are working against this happening because they're constantly feeding us excessively inflammatory language about the other side. And there's some structural things we need to fix in the media. There's some virtue things we need to inculcate in our communities. And then we do need virtuous leaders to guide us in this better direction.
Yep. And most of us would rather get news commentary from South Park than from David Brooks or George Will, because the issues are black and white and the commentary is funny. And that's a problem. Okay. Hey, thanks for listening. Come back next week and we'll talk about stuff some more. And maybe we'll have another live event and I'll try to figure out another way to humiliate myself upon entry of the event. Go to holypost.com, check out Holy Post Plus. That's how you can support us so we can keep doing this. And you'll also get lots of extra stuff. And we'll see you next week. Bye. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. October 10th is World Mental Health Day, and boy, I'm a little worried about the world's mental health. Wouldn't it be great to find someone who can help you on your own journey to better mental health? BetterHelp therapists have helped more than 5 million people worldwide. I like the fact that you can request a Christian therapist, and that you can change therapists at any time until you find the person just right for you. Lisa and I have really benefited from working with a Christian therapist from time to time, and I know you will too. The right therapist can make a huge difference, and BetterHelp has been matching people with the right therapist for 12 years. This World Mental Health Day, we're celebrating the therapists who've helped millions of people take a step forward. If you're ready to find the right therapist for you, BetterHelp can help you start that journey. Holy Post listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/holypost. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/holypost. This episode is sponsored by Blueland. When our kids were little, keeping the house clean became really important. Why? Because they licked stuff. They put everything in their mouths. The candy is on the floor. Wait, now it's back in their mouth. Lisa didn't just want our house clean. She wanted it mom clean. Clean enough for kids whose little fingers were everywhere and then back in their mouths. That's why we recommend switching to Blueland. Their products are made to meet the highest environmental standards. They aren't just clean, they're mom clean. Blueland products are 100% plastic-free and made with certified clean ingredients that are safe to use around the little ones we care about so much. You don't have to choose between the safe option and what actually gets your house clean. Try their dishwasher tablets, laundry tablets, or toilet tablets. Proven effective and completely plastic-free. And Blueland has a special offer for Holy Post listeners. Right now, get 15% off your first order by going to blueland.com/holypost. You won't want to miss this. Blueland.com/holypost for 15% off. That's blueland.com/holypost to get 15% off.
As you know, I've been using AG1 for a while now. For someone who hates taking vitamins and pills, drinking AG1 has been a fantastic way for me to get my vitamins, minerals, and probiotics every day in a delicious drink. And I'm not the only one. Just this morning, my wife was driving me to the office for reasons I don't have to get into. My car was in an accident. It's a whole mess. Anyway, we were on our way out the door and she filled up her own AG1 shaker bottle. And now my son, who's 20 and lifts weights every day, also swears by AG1. You could say I'm sort of a trendsetter in my household. Everyone loves AG1. Look, you may have tried other green drinks and found them to not be very appealing. I get it. I actually didn't expect to like the taste of AG1, but I really do. But there's even better news, because AG1 has just released 3 new flavors: berry, citrus, and tropical. So along with the original flavor, you can find the one that you like best. And just 1 scoop of any AG1 flavor contains the multivitamins, pre- and probiotics, superfoods, and antioxidants you need in one delicious daily habit. If you head over to drinkag1.com/holypost, you'll get a free welcome kit worth $76 when you subscribe. That includes 5 AG1 travel packs, a shaker, canister, and scoop. That's drinkag1.com/holypost to get started. And thanks to AG1 for sponsoring this episode. Saying that N.T. Wright has another book is a bit like saying the sun rose this morning. The man has written more books than I have brain cells. I'm not going to complain about it because I owe so much to his scholarship and his pastoral wisdom. His latest book is The Vision of Ephesians, The Task of the Church and the Glory of God. Some of Tom Wright's books are very academic, and some are written to more popular audiences, but this one, if I'm honest, is somewhere in between. It's short, less than 150 pages, but it's surprisingly deep. It obviously covers Paul's letter to the Ephesians, but in the process it tackles so many essential aspects of our faith and many issues that are incredibly relevant to Christians today. As you'll hear in my conversation with him, we talk about the expanding mission of the church way beyond just getting people to heaven, and we talk a lot about Paul's vision for church unity and what that means in our culturally diverse world. And that just scratches the surface of what the book covers, which is why I'm happy to tell Holy Post Plus subscribers that I've recorded a bonus interview with Dr. Wright about the armor of God passage from Ephesians chapter 6. You really don't want to miss that, so if you're not yet a Holy Post Plus subscriber, head over to holypost.com and join today. Not only will you get access to hours and hours of additional podcasts, videos, and articles, along with the Holy Post Book Club and exclusive merchandise, you'll also get the warm satisfaction of knowing that you're supporting our work of creating orthodox, pro-neighbor content that our culture so desperately needs right now. N.T. Wright is the former Bishop of Durham and the Senior Research Fellow at Wycliffe Hall, Oxford University. He's one of the leading New Testament scholars in the world today, and he is the author of all the books, all of them. He wrote all the books that you've ever seen out there. So his latest book is The Vision of Ephesians. Here is my conversation with N.T. Wright. Tom Wright, welcome back to the Holy Post.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Delighted to have you back. Your latest book, The Vision of Ephesians, The Task of the Church and the Glory of God. I've been in a habit recently in my own reading of scripture of reading whole letters of Paul in one sitting every morning, usually the shorter letters. So because I've got your book a few weeks ago, I started just reading through Ephesians over and over and over again. It doesn't take that long, but you do get the bigger argument in a different way than if you just look at the little parts as we often read it. One of the major things that you emphasize in this book is that we misread not just Ephesians, but we misread the entire Bible if we come at it with this medieval question of how do I get to heaven?
Exactly.
Which is not the question Paul's actually addressing in this letter. How would you sum up Paul's primary purpose for Ephesians? And how does it relate to our faith as a whole and the way we've often misunderstood it?
The latter question is really, really important because I do think that Western Christianity as a whole, both Catholic and Protestant, both liberal and conservative, both charismatic and revolutionary, etc., we've all allowed ourselves to go the medieval route of saying, I have this soul and it needs to get to heaven. Trouble is I'm sinful, so how do I do that? And all that stuff, which simply isn't what the New Testament's about. Jesus did not say that you should pray, thy kingdom, not thy kingdom come, but may I go to your kingdom somewhere else. God's kingdom coming on earth as in heaven is the joining together of heaven and earth. I would put it as broadly as this. Genesis 1 and 2 is the creation of a heaven plus earth world in which God wants to be at home with his human creatures. Revelation 21 and 2 is the new creation of new heavens and new earth in which heaven and earth are joined together in a whole new way for good. And that obviously halfway between those two, halfway canonically as it were, is Jesus himself, who is himself the heaven plus earth person. Now, all this is to say, we're talking about the temple here, that the temple, and many Western thinkers, because they regard the temple as either dangerously Jewish or whatever, have missed this. But the temple is where, for ancient Israel, heaven and earth come together, not as an escape from the rest of the world, but as the small working model of God's intention to bring heaven and earth together. There's that line of thought that runs from Genesis 1 and 2 through to Exodus 40, that after the debacle of the human fall, God calls this people, Abraham's family, and eventually through Exodus and rescue and all that, causes them to create the tabernacle in which God comes to live, so that despite the chaos following Genesis 3, God has placed in the middle of history, in the middle of the world, a small working model of what he intends to do, namely bring heaven and earth together and come and live there himself. So the whole business of incarnation, the whole business of the eschatology of saying renewed heaven and renewed earth, that's all woven into the great biblical story with Jesus' own personal career and his vocation to take the weight of the world's evil on himself and then to launch new creation through his resurrection. And then to give the new creationness of all this to his followers in the person of the Holy Spirit. All of this, which is on full display in Ephesians, needs to be brought out in extenso. And I totally agree that part of the problem has been, and I've been guilty of this myself, that so many expositors have assumed that Ephesians is really about how I get to heaven and what I'm supposed to be doing en route, and so have expounded individual paragraphs and verses as though that's what they must be about, without noticing. I mean, just the obvious verse, chapter 1, verse 10. God's purpose from the beginning was to sum up in the Messiah all things in heaven and on earth. I can't remember if I say it in this book or not, but I've said it in lectures often enough. If the Protestant reformers in the 16th century had taken Ephesians rather than Romans and Galatians as their set text. I mean, actually, Romans and Galatians don't make the reformers' point either, but it's so clear in Ephesians. If it had Ephesians, the whole history of the Western world, not just the Western church, might have been radically different as the church started to think, hang on, what would it look like if we were the new temple, if we were the small working model of new creation? There we are.
Make that argument.
I've gone on too long, but I can go on about this all day.
Oh, I know. You're excited about it. I am too. And you do make that argument about the reformers had they chosen Ephesians as a primary text. But part of the implications of this, and you're getting into it already, if we come to the New Testament believing that the mission of God is to rescue souls off of this decaying earth and it's going to be destroyed and we just have to get out of here, it leaves us with an impoverished ecclesiology, a very narrow view of the role of the church in the world today. It's basically to hold and preserve these redeemed people until they can escape.
Yep.
But Ephesians presents a very different vision. You talked about the temple, and the temple being the microcosm over heaven and earth are reunited. And you bring that then to the church, or I should say, Paul brings that then to the church and argues that the church is a small working model of new creation, that we are to be this foretaste to the rest of the world of what it is God is doing.
And that's the thing. In the very first paragraph, the long shout of praise from chapter 1, verse 3 through to 14, again and again, Paul says, in effect, God has done this for you in order that you should live and work for his praise and glory. He doesn't say in order that you should get out of here and go somewhere else. The church's vocation is to be the sign of God's glory in the world. And as I say that, and I think of churches that I've known and churches where I've belonged and preached and ministered, etc., I think, oh my goodness, we have fallen so far, not just fallen short, but we've been on the wrong track. We've not been looking at the vocation that we're supposed to have.
There's a hinge. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves a little bit. There's a hinge moment in Ephesians where Paul shifts and says, therefore, live in a manner worthy of the calling that you have received.
Yeah.
But if we don't understand what that calling is, how can we possibly live worthy of it? And to your point, we've fallen so short of this mission that God has given us because we don't understand what it is. We've misinterpreted the very purpose for which we exist.
And I think one of the signs of that, and I don't really bring this out in the book except maybe by implication, is that when we've done our analyses of biblical theology, we've tended to think of theology and then ethics as two quite separate things. So you have Ephesians 1 to 3. Well, this is obviously theology. Actually, it's prayer and worship, but it's about the gospel, about God sending Jesus, about the Holy Spirit, etc. And then we sort of change gear, and there is this therefore. And because particularly in Protestant theology, we are worried about any suggestion that I should be doing something which would further God's purpose, because, are you trying to justify yourself by works? We've kind of downplayed chapters 4 and 5, and then we wonder what chapter 6 is doing about spiritual warfare, because people are not usually arguing about chapter 4 and 5, except possibly the bit about husbands and wives and then slaves. That's a whole other issue. But you read the instructions and the warnings and so on. You say, yeah, that's how we're supposed to be. But there's a sense that this is all just temporary instructions for the church in its present mode, but not really of load-bearing significance for God's revelation of himself in and through the church to the world. Whereas the way I now read it is the watching world is supposed to be seeing human communities living in the Ephesians 4 and 5 way, and to be looking on and saying, didn't know you could live like that. Is this a new way of being human? To which the church would answer, well, it feels like that, yeah, and that's because we follow this man Jesus, who is the ultimate new human. And, it's not particular heroism on the church's part. It's just following the way of Jesus, the way of love, of forgiveness, of unity, of holiness. These are meant to send the signal to the wider world. And I just think the churches where I grew up and where I have ministered have just forgotten that, if we'd ever known it.
One of the signals that we send to the watching world is transmitted through the unity of the church, which is a huge theme in Ephesians. And it, in a way, it begins even all the way back in chapter 1, verse 10, where you talk about God bringing unity to all things in heaven and earth through Christ and under Christ. We don't seem to value unity in the church the way Paul does. A huge chunk of chapter 2 is all about the unity that has been achieved through Christ by bringing Jews and Gentiles together into one new person, into one community. And then he morphs that metaphor into the temple metaphor. And I've been a part of churches and denominations and movements that seem to have so emphasized missional efficiency that they've accepted homogeneity in the church as a more effective way to advance the mission of the gospel. And therefore, it's fine to not have diversity in our churches or to have culturally monolithic communities because they advance. And there's a lot of data that says they do advance more quickly. Yeah. Where are we missing Paul's values and emphasis when we put the mission of the church ahead of the unity of the church?
The answer is we may be advancing, but we're probably advancing down the wrong road. Paul wouldn't recognize homogeneous communities as genuine churches. I mean, think of the church where Paul was first a great teacher, namely in Antioch. Antioch was at the confluence of the trade routes, and they certainly didn't have a Jewish church and a Gentile church and an African church and a Turkish church, whatever. They were all together, and that was part of the glory of it. And it was only when some people came from James, according to Galatians 2, that anyone thought, oh, wait a minute, should we be doing this? And then Paul mounts his very strong argument in Galatians. Yes, of course you should. And here's the thing. Okay, there's several things to say here, but I was talking with somebody a week or two ago about this, that Paul's desire for polyglot, polychrome communities to reveal to the world what he says in Ephesians 3:10, the multiplex wisdom of God, a polypoikilos sophia tou theou, the many-colored wisdom of God. So I was saying this to somebody who said, but Tom, doesn't that just mean that you're embracing a woke agenda from the early 21st century, all this multiculturalism? And I said, listen, the fact that some people within what would call itself a woke movement happen at certain points to come along the same track that I am on doesn't mean that our starting point or finishing point is the same. I use the illustration of if you go on a road trip from Manhattan to Minneapolis and you happen to stay overnight in a motel somewhere alongside somebody who's on a road trip from Cleveland to Chicago, they might say, so what brings you from Cleveland to Chicago? And the answer is, that's not my journey at all. We happen to be on the same stretch of road right now, but our starting point was different and our goal is different. And as Pope Benedict said, nearly 20 years ago now, part of the problem of post-Enlightenment world is that the world has tried to get the benefits of the Christian gospel, particularly unity and harmony across and nations and ethnic groups, but without giving allegiance to the God of the gospel or the dynamic of the gospel. And basically it can't be done. They're trying to build, and this happens in many spheres of life, people who are sort of part of a larger Christian European culture, even if it isn't officially Christian. Tom Holland makes this point in Dominion, in his book Dominion. Mm-hmm. And the answer is no. We are not following this as a way of saying we just like multiculturalism for its own sake. And as it happens, multiculturalism is very difficult if you don't have the gospel at its heart. And here's the crucial point, which only really dawned on me in the last few years, that because those of us who've written about the so-called new perspective on Paul and about how every time Paul mentions justification, it seems to have to do with the coming together of Judeans and Gentiles in the same family. People have said, oh, you're swapping soteriology for sociology? And the answer is no, absolutely not, because Paul's argument is that if non-Jewish people who are idolaters by background, training, inclination, etc., if they come into the church by baptism and faith, then the cross is the thing which says they are idolaters no more. They are not sinners anymore. And so if you don't believe in the coming together of nations and races and ethnic groups and every language and kingdom and tribe and tongue in Christ, then you don't believe in the message of the cross, which has always been the center of the gospel. So it's not either let's have a multicultural church or let's have Jesus dying for our sins. It's because Jesus died for our sins that this Christian multiculturalism is possible. You see, when I wrote my big book on Paul, which is over 10 years ago now, Paul and the Faithfulness of God, I took it on the road and often did Q&A sessions, and people would say, if Paul could come back today, what would he be most surprised about? And I used to say, he would be most surprised not just that we are not united, but that we don't care. We don't think it matters. And I belong to various church fellowships here in Oxford, where I'm speaking to you from, or when my wife and I are up in Scotland, the various different groups there. And I grieve over the way in which, over many centuries now, the Western church has fragmented. So there are people who I know are attending other churches in other parts of town or out in the islands where we live in Scotland, but not getting together with people who believe very similar things to them and probably sing very similar hymns to them, etc. Not necessarily, but so you hear what I'm saying, that we've got a huge gap between what the New Testament is telling us to do and what we have colluded with for the last few hundred years. So I could go on, but you see the point.
I do, and I appreciate the way you said that what would surprise Paul is not just that we're not unified, but that we don't care. About being unified. And I think that's the part that your writings over the years, since I've been reading you 25 years now since I was in seminary, has opened my eyes to. There are a number of places in the New Testament where Paul extends liberty, where there's a diversity of opinions on something. He doesn't take a strong stand. He says to be charitable to those who have a different point of view. But on this question of the unity of the church across ethnic lines, he offers no room for debate. Correct. Whether it's Galatians, where he really has some harsh things to say of those who would divide the church along ethnic lines. 1 Corinthians 11, where he argues that the way they are taking communion and the disunified stratification across economic lines is such an affront to the gospel that God is allowing some of them to die in judgment. Or here in Ephesians, where the unity of the church and the very gospel itself is the revelation of the mystery of what God has done in bringing humans together across all these divisions. And we just dismiss that as, well, it's kind of icing on the cake. It's nice to have a diverse church community, but it's not essential.
Exactly. That is precisely the line we've taken. And in terms of unity, because I was, as you know, working as a bishop in the Church of England for several years, in the Church of England, you're faced with the question of unity simply within the Church of England, that there are many wings and branches and bits and pieces. And again and again, I would discover going round, I was responsible for about 250 churches in the northeast of England, but going round, you discover when you listen to what people are actually saying and what they actually believe and what really makes them tick, that what they're saying is not mostly incompatible with what people down the road are saying, but, oh, well, they're a bit too high church for us, or, oh, well, they're a bit more charismatic, so, oh, they dance in the aisles there and some of our people don't quite like that. And I've heard it all. I go back to Romans 14 and 15, which is, Romans 14 and 15 goes very closely with Ephesians down this line, that it looks as though Paul is aware that in Rome there are several different house churches, and, well, yes, we are worshipping Jesus, but of course we are good Judeans, so we keep Shabbat and we keep the kosher laws, and we're hoping that our daughters will marry other people from our own ethnic background and that sort of thing, and then other people elsewhere saying, well, yes, in theory we're part of the same fellowship as them, but they keep all these funny Jewish customs, and we know that we're free of that. And Paul says in Romans 14 and 15, these things are things you have to get past. They are things indifferent. Now, saying that something which has previously been mandatory is now optional and shouldn't be in the way of fellowship, that's about as big a step as you can take. It's huge. And the cultural symbols and signals that are being sent are just enormous. And that would be so if we tried to do it in today's church. But there's no escaping of it. I've heard people say, oh, well, in the book of Revelation, it says every nation and kingdom and tribe and tongue all singing together. But that's, of course, a vision for heaven, for the future. And then you read Romans 15, absolutely not. Romans 15, 7 through to 13, that wonderful climactic passage, that you may with one heart and voice glorify God, the Father of our Lord Jesus. There's no room for any mistake there. And let me just give you a bit of backstory on this, because, again, I'm not sure if I say it in this book, but it's been occurring to me for some time that at the time of the Protestant Reformation, and I honour the Protestant reformers, some of whom were burnt at the stake within a few hundred yards of where I'm sitting right now, but they were so keen to have the Bible and the liturgy in their own language that we'll encourage our French friends to translate into French and our Spanish friends to translate into Spanish. And so by the end of the 16th century, and certainly by the end of the 17th century, in any great city in Europe, whether it was, Brussels or Antwerp, or whether it was Madrid or London or wherever, you would have an English church, a Spanish church, a Portuguese church, a Polish church, etc., 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 all using their own language, hallelujah, but nobody noticed that they were then separated on ethnic lines, and then when they all migrated off to the New World and became Americans, they tended to take their traditions with them, and half of the divisions we now have in American Christianity stem from the export of 16th and 17th and 18th century ethnic divisions. So it's no surprise when then you get the very different and darker ideology of what we now call race in the 18th and 19th century, and this great division into black and white, which is so ridiculous for all sorts of reasons, then people go with it without realizing you are letting the gospel down, guys. This is a flagrant denial of what Paul, and for that matter, Jesus, were talking about. So I think it's important to understand that backstory. Otherwise, we just tend to beat ourselves up and think it's all our fault. And the answer is no, it took a few hundred years to get there. But now that we've woken up and seen that, we have no excuse for not addressing it.
So when it comes to addressing it, you have a sentence from page 51 that jumped out to me. You said, if the followers of Jesus aren't modeling the true multicultural community which the gospel is meant to create, don't be surprised if other people try to do it by other means. And what jumped out to me about that is there has been a very large secular movement towards multiculturalism, whether through the universities or other institutions. And in a weird way, by abandoning this multicultural vision that we see in the New Testament, surrendering that to secular communities and authorities, then their formation of multiculturalism in a weird way comes back into the church. And the reason I bring this up is one of the barriers that I've experienced comes from minority cultures. The United States, where I am, is a very diverse place. I have my own diverse family background, and there are sisters and brothers in Christ who come from smaller minority groups in the US, and their resistance to a multi-ethnic church is the argument, not without reason, that, well, if we join a larger multi-ethnic community of God's people, our identity will be diluted and the majority culture will just impose its view on us. And isn't it part of God's plan for our identity and cultural distinctiveness to remain expressed and not lost. How do you address that practical fear?
I would say absolutely. I ran into this one. I had my consciousness raised quite suddenly and sharply about 10 years or so ago. I was doing a seminar based on Paul and the Faithfulness of God in Fuller Seminary in Pasadena. And there was a panel of us. And when I'd said the sort of things that I tend to say, such as I've already said today, one of the African-American women theologians on the panel spoke up and said, not in a confrontative way, but just as a matter of fact, said, you need to know that when people like me hear people like you talking about this inclusive or whatever church, what we hear you say is, the rest of you all get to be honorary white males. And I just said, no, that's not the point. That just deconstructs the whole thing. But I totally understand. I totally get it, that in a culture which has been dominated by white and often male groups, then how easy to imagine, oh, well, we'll just kind of assimilate you in. So we'll pretend you're, say, honorary white males. Mm-hmm. Now, over against that, I totally agree. It's very interesting that in Paul's writings, though he says there is neither Judean nor Greek, neither slave nor free, etc., he can still give specific instructions to slaves and to free. He can still give specific instructions to males and to females, and he can give specific instructions, as in Romans, to Judeans and to Gentiles. And he can say, on a couple of occasions, Romans 11 and Philippians 3, I too am a Jew. I'm a Judean. And so this is how I look at the things from my point of view. So the postmodern language about the erasure of cultures is something we have to take very seriously, because, coming back to Ephesians 3:10, through the church, not the monochrome glory of God might be revealed, but precisely the polychrome, he polypoikilos Sophia tou theoudom, the multicolored wisdom of God. And if we water that down or turn it all into just lookalikes of ourselves or pretend lookalikes, then we are simply not doing what the church was supposed to do from the beginning. I mean, people often don't realize that in the ancient Mediterranean world, the world of Paul and his hearers, there were people of all sorts and conditions. There were people who traveled around this way and that, and they might sometimes comment on somebody from further down the African coast that their skin was a bit blacker than others, and some people from way up north in what we now would call Russia or somewhere happened to be fair-skinned. But color of skin was not a big deal. People of all sorts and colors came and went, and that had nothing to do with slavery either, which so has ingrained itself in Western consciousness, and quite understandably over the last 2 or 3 centuries. So once we think our way into Paul's culture and then hear exactly what you said, that he's not into erasing specific identities, but he's saying you are all one in Messiah Jesus. And Jesus, as the Jewish Messiah, the King, the Anointed One, he includes and enhances all that we are then created to be. And so that the great choir, I mean, I'm not sure if I use this imagery in this book, but musically speaking, the great choir of the whole church, where every voice has its own musical line, and like a great enormous symphony, they all work together. And if one is missing or is simply playing the same notes as the person next to them, then the music suffers as a result. And so I really want to affirm what you were saying there.
One of the struggles I have with this conversation around the preservation of diversity in the church and these different ethnic identities, I think it's partly because of my own story. I come from a mixed race family. My father's an immigrant from India. My mother's a white American, mostly Scandinavian and English. And one of this is getting far afield from your book, but I'm just curious. You know, when Paul talks about the diversity of the church and there's neither Jew nor Gentile, slave or free, barbarian, Scythian, all these different identities are one in Christ now. This is speculation, but what do you think Paul anticipated was going to happen in a generation or two as this new community in the Messiah is being formed, and all these people that had been very separated by culture and religion and divisions are now sharing a table, and they're sharing a community, and they're sharing, their children are growing up together. Did he anticipate that those people would probably end up intermarrying, and that new generations would be born, and that the sharp divisions between these different identity groups would melt to a degree? And the reason I bring this up is there's such a strong emphasis in a lot of the American church right now that we must preserve fill in the blank culture, South Asian culture or Filipino culture or Black culture. And I'm going, okay, but which one? Because South Asian culture in 1978 is different than South Asian culture in 1998 or 2008. And so culture is a constantly changing river. And to say we must preserve it because God wants us to, could, in a weird way, could justify racial segregation, lack of intermarriage, all those kinds of things that we've seen the horrors of.
I do see that. It's like, hoping that God will bring back the dinosaurs, because he obviously, if he made them in the first place, he must want them. I mean, there are all sorts of things going on there, but I'm thinking in terms of Acts 16, where Paul and his companions go through southern Turkey, and they meet in one of the newly found churches this young man called Timothy. And Timothy's mother is Jewish, but his father is Greek. And that's perfectly normal. Now, some Orthodox Jewish families in the first century would not allow a daughter to marry out and would have insisted that either she stays single or she marries a Judean. But there were mixed marriages of all sorts. And you can bet that in towns like, as I said, Antioch or Ephesus or Thessalonica or Corinth, never mind Rome, of course there are mixed marriages of all sorts, because people from all over the place have come together and bump into each other in the street or in the shop or whatever. Their families get to know each other. There are some ancient cities which have a very definitely ethnically demarcated quarter here and there, but many of them, it's not that easy, and the lines are blurred, and people meet across those lines. Now, notice that in 1 Corinthians 7, when Paul says that a widow is free to be married again, he's very clear. Only in the Lord. He doesn't say to somebody of her own ethnic group. It's in the Lord. There is a new kind of what's the word? Sorry, when I'm jet lagged, I lose technical terms as well as names. The endogamy, a new kind of endogamy, that if you're part of this family, you marry within this family. And obviously, Paul addresses the questions of what happens when one partner becomes a Christian and the other one holds back, etc., etc. But once somebody has been widowed and they're free to marry again, marry who you like. Paul has no ethnic specification at that point. In the Lord, because he envisages Christian families who will model that delightful coming together. I just had an email yesterday from a friend of mine who's pastor of a church in South Carolina, and he is African American, his wife is white American, and they're gloriously modeling, new ways of doing stuff to their church and the world around.
I agree. I mean, that what you're describing of Paul's vision is what I assumed as well. I think where we get into trouble is when we elevate the importance of maintaining cultural identity too much, or we give it gospel level importance. You could argue intermarriage between people of different ethnic or racial backgrounds is now, it's a bizarre way of actually making the argument of white supremacists. Using the gospel, that the separation of the races is what God intends, and therefore intermarriage is a way of diluting cultural distinctiveness. And I know that's not what the New Testament says.
Then we're back to apartheid South Africa, which is exactly what they argued. No, I mean, it's very clear that's not what Paul intends. And I know, obviously, in America, you're having a huge discussion about this at the moment, and it's become very ugly since the whole horrible Charlie Kirk incident, etc. And people are taking sides and interpreting things this way and that. But it seems to me the only reason we can have those arguments is because the church over the last 200 or 300 years hasn't dealt with these big issues, because, that's just sort of practical application, and we're doing the theology. And I want to say, no, this is theology, guys.
We're about out of time for our main interview, so I want to end it here, but I want you to stick around for a few minutes for a little bonus conversation around chapter 6 and spiritual warfare and the armor of God.
Yeah.
Dr. Wright's new book is The Vision of Ephesians, the Task of the Church and the Glory of God. We barely scratched the surface of some of the themes that are in this book, so I hope everyone will pick this up and put your nose into Ephesians for a while. It's a glorious exposition of what the church is called to be. Dr. Wright, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. It's always good to talk to you.
Hey, if you like this video, like and subscribe so that you can get more Holy Post content and others can find it as well.